Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Abigail Bacon. I'm the head of public services and outreach at the Klau Library in Cincinnati. Thank you all so much for joining us today. You can reach me directly at abacon@huc.edu. I'll put that in the chat box in a minute also. So welcome again. Today I am being joined with Adam Krupnick, who is our lecturer for today. Adam and his family live in New Jersey. And Adam went to undergrad at Penn State and followed up with 2 master's degrees from Villanova in accounting and finance. But Adam, as I think you will agree with me after today's lecture, should probably consider another degree or another career in or becoming an archivist, because the research that he did for this lecture and for his personal use is truly incredible, and it's a really engaging story that I think that you'll all enjoy today. I first heard of Adam's talk, the abbreviated version, at the Association of Jewish Libraries conference that was in Philadelphia back in the spring, summer. And he, along with Monika Schreiber, who I see is on the call today from the University of Vienna, they had worked together on this project, recovering the stolen books. And I was so excited by what they had to say that I wanted to learn more about it and hear more about it and share it with all of you. So thank you again for joining us today. And I'm going to turn things over to Adam.
Yes, excellent. All right, so thanks, Abigail, for the introduction, and truly my heartfelt appreciation to you and the Hebrew Union College for inviting me here to present today. This work I've done has really been a labor of love, and I've really enjoyed doing it. But as you heard from my introduction, I am kind of just an accountant from New Jersey. This isn't my everyday. I do this kind of in my spare time. So really will try my best to provide a compelling presentation about the Belf family and really hear about their story. Now, I do want to mention that even though I am an amateur in this regard, as Abigail kind of alluded to, I've also worked with some tremendously talented and professional people in this space. And so some of the research that you hear today will actually have been prepared by them. So let's just jump right in. So let me share my screen real quick. Everyone see my screen okay? Yep, okay, excellent. All right, so again, my name is Adam Krupnick, and I am the spouse of a Belf family member. My wife is the great-great-granddaughter of Joel Moses Belf, who's the original patriarch of the Belf book family publishing business. And so my wife and I, we actually got married in 2013. As you can see here, a picture from our wedding day. And I heard a little bit about the Belf family story while we were dating, and a little bit around the time we got married, but it really was a couple of years until I actually got more into finding out about the Belf family, and here's the reason why. This is a picture of my daughter. She was born in May 2016. You can see her sleeping soundly in her bassinet here. Now, my wife and I, we were pretty nervous first-time parents. This bassinet was in our bedroom, just a couple of feet away from our bed. And so when my daughter would wake up in the middle of the night, we'd feed her, we'd change her, and then we put her back to sleep, and it might be the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And as any new parent knows, you never want to do anything whatsoever to wake a sleeping baby. So I had to come up with some sort of quiet activity that I could do while my daughter was sleeping to make sure that I absolutely did not wake her up. And so it was probably because she was just a few weeks old, and we had just given her name, and I was thinking about who she was named for and who others in the family might be named for, that I really started thinking more about the Belf family and their story in Vienna. So as part of my quiet activity, that's exactly what I did. I went ahead and I started researching the Belf family. And so now, as any real world amateur historian nowadays will do, I went immediately to Google and I just typed in Belf family Vienna. And I was actually pretty amazed that some interesting information actually came up. And one of those first things that did come up was actually a presentation by Dr. Monika Schreiber of the University of Vienna, and at a conference, the Association of Jewish Libraries conference in 2015, where she actually discussed the restitution, the return of a book that the university had deemed as stolen between the years of 1938 and 1945. And they were returning that book back to my wife's great aunt Gertie. And that book had been turned back in 2011. So now this is not a story I had ever heard before. I knew nothing about it, but obviously I was very excited to learn about it. And I thought what great next step would be to reach out to Monika and find out a little bit more about what she knew as I continued to research the family. So that's exactly what I did. So I reached out to Monika. You can see here, this is actually my first email I ever sent her. It's about 3 weeks after my daughter was born. And you can see it's at about 10:30 at night. I emailed her, just explained, who we were and that I found her presentation and how excited I was and that I wanted to connect more with her. She was very gracious. She emailed me back just a couple of hours later. Again, she's in Vienna. She emailed me back about 2 o'clock in the morning, making that initial connection. As I was saying before, I couldn't always fall back asleep. So apparently I then replied back to her at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's kind of how our collaboration started from there. So now let me tell you a little bit about the Belf family itself. So the Belf family, they were a multi-generational family of book publishers and bookstore owners. And again, that patriarch of the family was Joel Moses Belf, born in 1846 in Ukraine. Again, this is my wife's great-great-grandfather. And him and his wife, Babette, they actually had 10 children, and we're fortunate enough to actually have a picture of them here. This is from about 1890. And you can see Joel Moses here, his wife, Babette, and here's 9 of their 10 children. Now, again, they started to get into the bookstore business. They actually started the business in 1868. So that's actually when Joel Moses Belf was only 22 years old, so pretty entrepreneurial in nature. And he set up the business right in the heart of Vienna at Stettengasse 8. So if we were to look at a modern day map of Vienna, you see the Danube here, and this is where the original bookstore was. And now a couple of years after they started the bookstore business, they were selling other people's books, but apparently they started getting into publishing books themselves. So after about 13 years, they published their first book. And here's a copy that I actually found. It's from 1881. It references Joel Moses Belf here, bookstore, and the address we looked at before. And this is a Passover Haggadah. And so this is the first foray into publishing that they went into, at least the first copy that I've been able to find 13 years after the business was started. Great picture on the interior of it that I kind of really liked. I presume it to be a Passover Seder celebrating. Next book I was actually able to find from them, again, also, and that last book I actually found on Google Books of all places. Next book I was able to find from them was actually from 1885. So a couple of years later, they published a next book. Again, it references Joel Moses Belf and his address. This one's actually not so much a book as it is a 216-year calendar. And it goes from the year 1784 to the year 2000. And so I kind of like to think of this as something that actually bridges the gap between the old and the new, because it covers the time of Joel Moses Belf all the way through the years when my wife was actually born, his great-great-granddaughter. And I just like to think about maybe he was thinking about his future lineage when he was putting this calendar together. And this book was actually found at the University of Frankfurt in Germany. But it's not just online books that we've been able to find, online locations, but actually at the Klau library itself, we found examples that Abigail was actually able to share with me. So here's an example of another Passover Haggadah. You can see here reference to the Hebrew Union College. And this book is actually, again, by Joel Moses Belf, dating to 1896. And it's actually one of 15 books in total that are held as part of the Klau collection. So now the bookstore continued to publish books. They continued to sell books. I'm speculating here, but it may have been that they needed more space, and the bookstore actually ended up moving in 1913. So from their original location, they moved in 1903 to Rabensteig 3. So again, if you kind of orient yourself to modern day Vienna, here's the Danube River, and here is the first bookstore. If you kind of zoom in on that center area there, you can see the first bookstore, and the second bookstore moved all the way 63 meters away. So just around the corner, it happens to be in the exact same building. And so you might be wondering, why they moved. Again, I'm just speculating that possibly they needed more space. But the reason that they stayed in that particular area was because that actually is the Jewish quarter of Vienna. So we have this great picture here from 1913 by a photographer, and this is actually part of the Albert Kahn Museum that we were able to get, that shows what the Jewish quarter looked like in Vienna around the time of Joel Moses Belf's bookstore. Now, this photographer happened to be really great, and he happened to get a picture of Joel Moses Belf's bookstore itself, and you can see that here again in 1913, reference to Joel Moses Belf, and this is his actual bookstore at that time. Now, it's almost like he was working for us that day, because he actually was able to get an even further picture. So if you were to zoom in on this rightmost section, he took a picture of the actual publications that were for sale. It's as if the glass doors were kind of opened, and you can see a very clear image of the different books that they were going to be selling. So overall, the book publishing business continued and the bookstore business continued. Overall, we've been able to find about 33 books that have been published by Joel Moses Belf. And that includes really 14 books plus 2 9-volume sets of prayer books that have been able to find. And he published books from 1881 to 1914, so about 33 years of publishing books. Now, the books were largely religious in nature, mostly for holidays and such. And unfortunately, Joel Moses Belf himself died in December 1913 at the age of 67. And we're actually able to find a copy of his obituary in a publication. And so you can see here it references Joel Moses Belf, bookstore owner, and you can say his funeral, December 16th, 1913. So what happened to the business next? Well, as we remember from a minute ago, he actually had a very large family, 9 children. So here's Joel Moses Belf again and his wife. Well, actually, one of those children, Joseph, was the next one to take up the mantle and to continue the business on from there. So a little bit about Joseph. So he was born in 1883. So that means he was only 30 years old in 1913 when his father passed away, and he took up the business. Now, from there, in 1919, he actually got his own approval to sell books. And so he was no longer needed to operate under his father's name, who had passed away. But in 1919, he was able to actually sell books on his own. And so what did that actually mean? So it means the bookstore actually changed names on the front of it. And here's a picture of the bookstore in around 1920. You can see reference to Joseph Belf here. And you can see actually Joseph standing there in the front of the bookstore. And this bookstore is also at Ravage Site 3. Now, when you compare the 2 bookstores side by side, you really see it absolutely is the same bookstore. You can see on the left, Joel Moses Belf, on the right, Joseph Belf, and you can see the 3 defined sections on the left-hand side, the sections where they had books for sale, and then one on the right for books for sale. Again, you can very clearly see that it is the same bookstore. Now, the business continued to grow, and it turns out that customers didn't need to just come to the bookstore in order to purchase books, but actually recently I found an example where they actually put together a book catalog. And I apologize for the quality of this image. I just bought this item just a couple of weeks ago. It's coming from Serbia. It's actually in the mail as we speak. And I was hoping to have it here for the presentation today, but unfortunately it didn't arrive in time. And you can see here the referencing it's a catalog from Joseph Belf in 1930. On the interior of the catalog, it actually lists out a whole bunch of different books that are for sale. Again, I apologize for the quality of this image, but it references a whole bunch of books that the bookstore had for sale and even the prices that they have to sell them. So it must have been that Joseph was handing these out to customers, or he was, mailing them out to customers. And we actually did find an example of that. I actually have a postcard here, references Joseph Belf. It's from 1925, and actually looks to be a sales invoice of some sort. It references a particular book being sold, and the area that I highlighted here actually shows sold for 850 shilling. Now, the business continued to be pretty successful, and Joseph himself had a pretty large family. Joseph had 5 children. Fred was the oldest. That's actually my wife's grandfather. And Joseph also had his son Max, Hugo, Aegon, and Gertie. And we have some pictures of them from the 1930s. You can see Joseph here, his wife, along with Max, that's the second oldest child, and Gertie. You can see they're very well dressed. The family, from what we can gather, was very successful, very financially well off. And this is actually from a resort town in Austria. Another picture here of Fred, that's my wife's grandfather, along with Pearl, that's my wife's grandmother, and Pearl's brother, Irving. So again, very well dressed, overall just showing that we're a very successful family, through the 1930s. Now, as we know, in the 1930s, it was a very difficult time for Jews in Europe, and we started to see examples of that early on, specifically to the Belf family. Here's a publication. It's called the Jewish Review, I found, from 1934. And if we actually zoom in on the section in the middle, it actually says that there was a bombing at the Belf bookstore itself on June 19th, 1934. Fortunately, I guess it happened at 9 p.m. when no one was there, so no one was physically hurt, but there was some damage to the property. Now, the family overall continued, despite this difficult circumstances, continued to thrive as a business. They continued to publish more books, and Josef himself published 38 books in total from what we've been able to find so far. And those books, so it's 29 books plus, again, one of those 9-volume prayer book sets. And they published books from 1923 all the way through 1938. Just as a good accountant, I always like to throw charts and numbers in, and it's just a thing we kind of like to do. So I threw just some chart together. If I were to look at the actual books that were published by the father, Joel Moses Belf, as compared to Joseph Belf, if I again can't count those 9-volume prayer book sets as kind of as one, you can see in about 33 years, Joseph published about 16 items, as opposed to Joseph, he published about twice as much over about half the amount of time. So again, it was rapidly increasing in the number of books that they were publishing and continuing to be a very successful business. And all of that obviously changed as we got into late 1938. In March 1938, as we know, the Nazis annexed Austria, and things changed very rapidly for the Belfs from there. Only a few months after that, we can actually see the Belfs starting to leave from Austria. So I was actually able to find a ship's manifest. So this is from June 1938, so only about 3 months after Germany had annexed Austria. The Belfs are starting to leave from Turbong, which is in France, on the Queen Mary. And you can see here who is leaving. It's actually Fred and his wife. So this is my wife's grandmother and grandfather. And interestingly enough, it notes that they're leaving from Vienna, but it doesn't list Vienna as part of Austria. It lists Vienna as part of Germany, as we know from a couple of months ago that it had just been annexed. And it lists Joel Moses Belf as their father, and where are they going? They're going to their uncle in New Jersey, and that ship actually arrived about 5 days later in the United States. So if we were to look at a map of that, the Belfs left from Vienna all the way to France, and it's about a 1,600-kilometer trek that they had to make, so pretty long distance. Now, a lot of the documents that we found up to this point were largely from public record searches. I went to genealogy sites. Some of those ship records are actually from Ellis Island, but I was actually fortunate enough to get documents from the Austrian State Archives themselves. So I went through a process where I submitted an application in 2016, and they actually sent me it was actually took a 2-year process, and one day about 400 pages of documents arrived in the mail at my house. A lot of them are from the 30s and 40s. Some of them are from post-World War II with the Austrian government communicating with the Belfs. I'm an accountant from New Jersey. I don't deal in these types of materials on a regular basis. So when I got these 400 pages of documents, I was really just overwhelmed with the amount of information and material that the Germans and also the Austrians had on the Belf family themselves. And I'll show some examples here. I mean, it's just pretty incredible to see references of the Belfs on documents that also reference, Hitler, or references from the 30s with the Belfs with like Nazi insignias. I mean, it just truly sends a chill down my spine, like every time I look at these documents. And as part of this collection, 400 documents that they sent me, there actually was another one very interesting document. And this is from December 1938. And it's written by Bloom Belf, who is Joseph's wife. And it actually says here, if you zoom in, it says, "In the name of my husband, the Jew, Josef Belf, who had a bookstore at Reibensteig 3, November 10th, 1938, he was actually taken and sent to Dachau." And so if you know history, you know that November 9th, November 10th, 1938 is actually what's known as Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass, also in the November pogroms. So that means that Joseph was taken, his bookstore was raided as part of Kristallnacht and sent to Dachau. So the next logical step for me was obviously to reach out to Dachau and find out a little bit more about his time there. And so that's what I did. So I reached out to them. They did confirm that Joseph was there. He arrived November 15th, 1938. So only about 5 days after he was taken from Vienna, he was already at Dachau. And I was actually able even to find the original logbook entry from when he even originally arrived. You can see here, and this is from Dachau, it says Josef Belf, born 1883, and even his number here. Now, Joseph was there for about a month and a half. Fortunately, he was released. My understanding is that a lot of people that were taken in these early times were actually released in late 1938 or early 1934. You can see he was released January 3rd, 1939. And here is actually the card from Dachau itself, listing Josef Belf and his dismissal date, his exit date of January 3rd, 1939. So obviously, having gone through this tremendous ordeal, you're wondering, what is next for the Belfs? And it was probably pretty clear to them that it was time for them to leave Austria as well. So next, I was able to find this document. This is from the Emigration Department. So leaving from Vienna, it's by Josef Belf. And it says here, Joseph is going to be leaving, and he's going to be going to his son, Fred, who we knew from about a year earlier, had already moved to the United States. And he was going to be leaving with his wife and two of his children, Max and Gertie. Now the interesting thing about that document, if you remember from a moment ago, we said that Joseph was released from Dachau January 3rd, 1939. But if I actually look at that document that is signed by Joseph himself, it's actually signed and dated December 1938. So that means he actually completed this document while still at Dachau. So pretty incredible to find. And so next, I, of course, thought they would go straight to a ship and head to the United States. And that's where I originally thought the next part of my presentation was going to go. But it was while I was preparing for this presentation that I actually came across this picture of Joseph and his wife and one of their daughters, Gertie. And this is presumably taken by their son, Max. And on the back, it actually says April 1939. So this is about 4 months after Joseph had left Dachau. And it says that they were apparently in Switzerland. And so if we were to actually look at a map, they traveled from Austria about 900 kilometers to Switzerland. And this is actually on the border of Switzerland and France. And so next it appeared that they were going to be leaving Europe. And I was able to find that. And so here's actually another copy of a ship manifest, January 15th, 1940. So about 9 months after they were in Switzerland, you can see that they're headed towards the port city of Genoa, Italy, and they're leaving on the SS Manhattan. And so who was on that ship? It was Joseph and his wife and those same two children that he had completed in that document. This is his daughter Gertie and his second oldest son, Max. And where are they headed? They're headed towards their son, Fred Belf, who, as we saw before, was already in the United States. And it took about 9 days for them to arrive in the United States. So looking at where they went from Austria, again, about 900 kilometers to Switzerland, and then about 400 kilometers south through Italy, and then over to the United States. And that is how it went. So Joseph and his wife, they were living in Brooklyn in the United States. And Joseph, no longer a book publisher or bookstore owner, he actually worked as an upholsterer. And we actually have this picture of him from 1944 when he was in the United States. You can see April 1944. This is a picture of Joseph and his wife. And this is one of his grandchildren. We think that it was a grandson, Burton, who's the son of Max. Now, unfortunately, just a few months after this picture was taken, Joseph did pass away. And this is another document I got from the Austrian State Archives. This is a copy of his death certificate showing Joseph Belf. So in August 1944, just a few months after that picture was taken, he did pass away. It lists him as the son of Joel Moses Belf, and it says that he passed away, unfortunately, from lung cancer. And so all the children did end up leaving from Europe. And you can actually see they spread out across the world. You can see they obviously started in Austria, and Fred, who's my wife's grandfather, ended up in New Jersey. Gertie ended up in Texas. Max ended up in Colorado, and Hugo and Aegon ended up in Israel. So now that we had all this information about the family and all the history, I thought the next great step would be for us to start to create as complete a collection of Belf family books that had been published by them as we possibly could. And that's exactly what we did. So from the 71 books that we've been able to figure out that they published so far, we've so far have been able to acquire 22 of those in total. In addition, I've been able to find 11 more full digital copies of books. So about 33 of the 71, so a little less than half, we've been able to get access to. And it's not just books that are published by them, but even books that were just sold through their bookstore that we've been trying to acquire. So I've been able to purchase 3 books that were sold through the store itself. You might be wondering how I was actually able to find these books or acquire them. Well, we mostly find them through rare book sites and even sometimes on eBay. And much like the Belf's children themselves that kind of spread out all over the world, so too have the books that I purchased. And I've actually been able to purchase them from 10 different countries. So we purchased them from the United States, from Switzerland, from France, from the United Kingdom, from Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Poland, Italy, and even Israel itself. So the books have really spread out all across the world. Now, you might also be thinking, how is it that I figure out that a book is actually from the Belfs? And so, as you know, as I saw in some of the pictures, if a book is actually published by somebody, their name would be listed on the title page. So here's an example of Joe Moses Belf on the title page. Here's a picture of Joseph Belf listed on a title page. And here's my little secret of the presentation. So sometimes in the books, if it's not published by them, they put various stickers or labels or stamps on the interior of the books to note that it had passed through their bookstore. And so my secret of the presentation has been that's actually been hiding in this presentation the entire time. So if you look in the top left, here's a copy of one of those stickers that references through the Joseph Belf's bookstore. And here is one referencing through Joseph's bookstore, one of those stamps. One of those stickers. And then there were also stamps that were affixed to the interior of books. So this is one from Joe Moses Belf's bookstore, and here is one from Joseph Belf's bookstore. So again, if you kind of wind back to that original restitution of the book from the University of Vienna, and here's the picture I showed at the beginning. If I actually unhide the bottom section of the book, you can see one of those actual stamps, which is part of the way that they established the provenance of the book, that it was actually one of the books that had been originally at one point owned by the Belf family, and they determined that it should be returned to the family. So what have we done with all these books? Well, we actually have created a collection, and here is actually a bookshelf on the interior of our house, and we've affectionately labeled the top shelf of the bookshelf as the Belf shelf, where we display all the Belf family books. Now, once we started collecting some of the books and getting them in our possession and being able to see them and look at them, I actually were able to find even more information out about the family. So even more so than just looking at a list of the books on, an Excel spreadsheet or seeing them, in a particular library, we learned more about the family. So I'll share a couple of examples of the books here that actually are in our collection. So here's the oldest book that we have. It is from 1889. You can see reference to Joel Moses Belf here, and it is a high holiday prayer book. It's for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. There actually was a book very similar published by Joe Moses Belf's son. This is from Joseph. You can see here, and also same book, second day of Rosh Hashanah. This one notes that it's actually one of a 9-volume set, and that's where I got the idea that probably the books that were published by Joel Moses Belf was also in a 9-volume set. So there's for the first day of Rosh Hashanah, second day of Rosh Hashanah, I found one for Yom Kippur and items like that. So now if you actually compare the two books side by side, you can see they're very similar in style. The one on the left is by Joel Moses Belf, the one on the right by Joseph Belf. And even if you look at the center of the book, you can see it's the exact same design between the two of them. Now, it wasn't just religious books, as I said. They also published some children's books. So we have a copy of a book here, and I have to thank Abigail again for this one. This is actually part of the Klau Library collection. This is an illustrated children's book. It's part of the Klau collection, as I said. We also have this as part of our Belf family collection here. So when I actually look at the title page, this one on the left of the one in the Klau collection versus the one on the right from our personal collection, you can see they're pretty similar. They reference that it's from Joseph Belf. Just by coincidence, the copy that we purchased had this additional sticker on here, and it actually says that this book was approved by the Austrian Ministry of Education as a school textbook in 1931, and it lists out the school district that it relates to and the elementary school, and apparently that school district is still in existence today. So pretty great that, again, looking at just a list of books, I wouldn't have actually ever found out this type of information. So the final books that were published by the Belfs happened in 1937 and 1938. The book publishing business, as we know, continued to be pretty successful. They're publishing more and more books, and these 2 years published about 10% of the overall books that were published by the family in general. It was increasing in nature. And as we know, 1938 makes sense that it was the last year that any books were published, given what we know of what happened to Joseph and his family. So in 1937, 2 books were published. And so they actually started publishing books that were not just religious in nature, but were non-religious and were different history subjects. And this is actually a book from 1937, and it's actually called The Yellow Church, and this is about Buddhism. We have 4 books published in 1938, and this one is about Spain and Spain's rise to power. And you can see between the 2 years, the books are very similar. It's got the same coloring, the picture is in the exact same location, the names are in the exact same location. And it turns out from speaking with my mother-in-law that these non-religious books, these history books, were actually a passion of her father, Fred Belf, so Joseph's oldest son, who was actually working in 1938 on becoming the third generation of book publishers. And he was the one who actually was continuing to publish these non-religious texts. And it was actually through these connections that he was actually able to get out of Austria in March 1938. So it wasn't just the purchasing of books that we've gone through. It's also, we've been working to get restitution of additional books. So again, as Monika returned the one book from the University of Vienna back to the Belf family in 2011, we also worked on the return of additional books. So in total, so I went through and I searched various looted art websites, particularly Lost Art and lootedart.com, and they actually list out different details of the materials, where they are, the reason that they believe that they're stolen. And it actually lists out contact information of who you should reach out to, which is what I did. I reached out to them, established the family connection, and these are books that they wanted to return back to the Belf family. And through that process, we're actually able to get an additional 5 books that were deemed to have been stolen from the Belfs, returned from 4 different institutions back to the Belf family. And so we actually were able to get 2 different books from the Municipal Library of Nuremberg, which is the IKG collection. And I actually have a picture of one of those here. So this is a Jewish kids calendar. You can see reference to the IKG collection on the spine here. And on the interior, another one of those stickers saying that it had passed through Josef Belf's bookstore. Now, the really interesting thing about the IKG collection, when it was sent to us, these 2 books are part of a 10,000 volumes of books that were held in the personal collection of Julius Streicher, who was a high-level Nazi official. He was a chief propagandist and a notorious anti-Semite and publisher of the Der Stürmer publication. And it's just interesting to me that 10,000 books were in his personal possession or in the possession of the Der Stürmer publication, just that these books at some point may have been in possession of such a terrible person and now have been returned to the family. It's just pretty incredible. We also got books returned from the University of Potsdam, the Free University of Berlin, and also a book from Dachau itself. This recently just happened just a couple of weeks ago. I found out that Dachau actually has a Belf book itself. Now, it's not a book that they had since the 1930s. They acquired it much long thereafter. And I've been conversing with them, and they actually asked if it would be okay if the Belf family would leave it as part of the Dachau permanent collection. And so I spoke with my mother-in-law, and she actually agreed that that was a great idea. And so this book is actually there on permanent loan with Dachau. So now it hasn't just been Belf books that we've been looking for. It's really anything that they've sold or published or sold through their store. And so if we look, again, I apologize for the quality of this picture, but this is the reverse side of that 1930s catalog, and it discusses the different types of things that were sold through the Belf Bookstore. And it actually says, various types of books as we've gone over, but it also said that they sold talit and fine embroidery and Torah scrolls and even modern Jewish antiques. And we've been able to find some examples of that. Here's actually some Torah covers that we found that are actually part of the collection of the Jewish Prague Museum. And you can see a label here referencing Joel Moses Belf. So these were sold by them, or embroidered by them, or possibly embroidered by them. But it wasn't just Torah covers. I was actually able to find, we've been able to find ketubas. And so this was provided to me by Monika at the University of Vienna. So this is a ketuba from 1938. It references here at the bottom, Joel Moses Belf at the original bookstore. And just this week, I was able to find another ketuba, this one printed by Josef Belf, and this is held as part of the National Library of Israel. You can see at the bottom here reference to Josef Belf. And had I have known more about these ketubas, maybe when my wife and I got married back in 2013, would have tried really hard to find a ketuba, because just how special would that have been if my wife and I were married on, an incomplete, Belf ketuba. Just would have been something special. Unfortunately, I haven't come across any, but it would have just been pretty amazing if I could have. So now throughout this, again, I've really worked with Dr. Monika Schreiber through this, and she's been tremendously helpful through all this research. And since that first email that I sent to her back in 2016, when my daughter was about 3 weeks old, we've had over 300 email communications back and forth. So it's been a lot of chatter. I get really excited every time I share a new piece of information with her. She always is excited when she sends information back to me. And we were even, as Abigail said, able to present at the Association of Jewish Libraries Conference, a shortened version of this presentation in June 2022. Which is, again, the same conference that I first found out about Monika, because she had presented at 2015's AJL conference. And so here's a picture of us at that conference. Here's myself and Monika, a picture of my wife, my mother-in-law, Diane, and my brother-in-law here. So now it's also really great that Monika, again, works at the University of Vienna, so she's on the ground there. And she's actually been very generous to have taken pictures of what the Belf bookstores look like today. The buildings themselves have not been destroyed, so they still exist. So that's what I'm going to show you next. So the original bookstore looks like this today. It's a picture she took in 2017 at Steitensteingasse 8. And here is a picture of just a couple of doors down. This is the main temple in Vienna that was built in 1825. And so just establishing that, again, this is the Jewish section of Vienna. So this is the original bookstore, but again, the bookstore had moved in 1903, so we have a picture of that as well. So when it moved in 1903 to Rebensteig 3, the bookstore today actually is the Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies, is actually on the second floor of where that original bookstore was. And if I were to actually look again at a picture of Joe Moses Belf's bookstore from 1913, I feel like I see similarities. There's in the front foreground, you can kind of see this upward sloping road. I feel like I see that same thing on the most recent picture from today. Now the story gets actually better. By coincidence, a new bookstore actually opened at that same location on the first floor. It's completely unrelated to the Belf family. It's just by coincidence. It's called the Singer Bookstore on the first floor. And Monika was able to go to some presentations there in January 2020 to see the interior of the bookstore. But the back room, the medieval vault, is the same as it was in Josef and Joe Moses Belf's time. So it's pretty incredible to think that this is the space that they occupied so many years ago. Now, the next question would be, now that we've done all this research, we've looked at the family, like what is the next steps? What can we do? And this is where I'd really have to turn it over to Monika and a colleague of hers, Felicitas, who I can see is on the presentation as well. And she's a well-known Jewish museum curator. And they're actually working on new locations for a Belf family exhibit that we'd love to have opened in Vienna sometime in the next couple of years to hopefully display some of this information and really try to keep the Belf family book publishing business and their story alive. And so that's really all I have today. So I just want to thank everyone for listening. I do have some of my contact information here. Happy to take questions. You'll see here, I did just create a new email address a couple of weeks ago. I called it belfbooks@gmail.com. If anyone wants to reach out to me, has any questions after the presentation, I'd be more than happy to answer them. If anyone's from any libraries or museums and you have pieces in your collection that you want to discuss, I'd be more than happy to collaborate with you all. But that's really all I have, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Adam. I just want to mention on that note, we have a display over in the Klau library where we've put, I think, 10 or so of the Belf family items for display. If any of our visitors today are local, please stop by and check it out while it's still open, because it's our way of honoring the Belf family and their legacy. And we thank Adam for his presentation today. Let's take some questions here in the chat box. First one, how do you prove that a book was stolen and not just part of somebody's private collection? Like a bookstore customer that now has the book and then it kind of ended up somewhere else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a good question. So when I reached out to those sites, they are actually the ones that have already determined that a book has been stolen. So it's not something that we're making a determination of. They've already determined that it's a book that has been stolen. And they, through these various sites, post the materials for families of books or paintings or other objects to then try to reach out to kind of establish those connections. So that's not something that we had been making a determination on. That's something the different universities had been making determinations on.
Okay, and on a related note, I don't know if you've read the book, The Book Thieves, the Nazi Looting of Europe's Libraries and the Race to Return a Library Inheritance. That's a book by Anders Rydell. But the questioner, the audience member, wanted to know if you have reached out to the initiative that's mentioned there in order to, find the books again. So
I have not, but I did just write down the name of that book, and it's something I'm going to be reading soon. And like I said, I do this in my spare time, right? And I really do appreciate and enjoy doing this research. But I definitely want to read that book and find out more about it. So I would, if whoever asks that question, if you want to email me at the belfbooks@gmail.com, I'd be more than happy to take some of that information and follow up with that.
Great. Okay, have you been able to find any of the Belf books on Project Gutenberg? Or was it, I think you'd mentioned Google Books, and was there other options?
Yeah, I have not actually come across that, but I again wrote it down so I can look for that. Most of my searches have been through various like WorldCat. I'm able to find like where different books are all over the world, and there's actually a way you can see which digital versions are there. I know JTS in New York actually has some books, and I right before the pandemic I was about to go and check out some of their collection. I've been to the Rare Books Library at Princeton University where I work to see some of their collections, but I have not come across the Gutenberg before.
So after your AJL presentation, did librarians reach out to you telling you about the things that they have in their collection that they wanted to share with you?
Yep, no, absolutely. And I think that was the great part of the presentation at the AJL conference, was these were really experts in the area that really knew a lot about this material, much more than I do as just an amateur. And people did reach out to me, and I was able to connect with some additional people. I even was able to connect with a person at where I work in the Jewish Study Library at Princeton.
Very neat. When I was looking for the books in your collection and from the Belf collection, it said in one of our record notes that one of our books had the Belf stamp or sticker in it. And I was so excited. I went into our rare book room to go take a look at it. And then I found that it was rebound, and whoever had rebound it, hadn't noticed that the sticker was something there of historical significance, and it's gone. So that was a little disappointing. So I imagine that, especially in libraries, things aren't preserved exactly as they arrived to the library. So I hope maybe from some private collections or other people's, experience, they'll be able to kind of contribute more to the discussion.
And that's actually one of the things I found as well, is even when I'm looking for books, publisher isn't always something that's always listed as a characteristic of a book. They say like who the author is and the title is. And so I found a lot of examples of the same book just happened to be published by another individual. And again, I went to one rare book reading room, and I was so excited to see a new Belf book, and it turned out just at the last second that it actually wasn't one of the ones that were published by them. So maybe it was something similar. Maybe it was like rebound, and maybe there was a label that was taken off it, so it was published by someone else, but maybe just sold through their store. But there was no indication, once I got there, that it had any relationship to the Belf family, unfortunately.
And so what is your interest in having books that just passed through the Belf store? Not the things that they publish, but the ones that they kind of resold.
Yeah, I think it's just part of the history. I mean, from what I've seen when his bookstore was raided, I've seen estimates that they had 26,000 books in the store. So I guess I don't really ever know what book was in someone's private collection, what book was part of the bookstore, but it's just a good piece of history that it actually at one point was in their possession, and it's just of general interest to us.
And I guess the last question, unless anybody else adds anything to the chat, I'm wondering, did any family members kind of get in on the action throughout this process and begun their own independent research to collaborate with you?
Yeah, so I've definitely used a lot of the family members as resources. So I unfortunately didn't meet my wife's grandfather, Fred, who passed away in 1993, but I did actually speak once to Gertie. She passed away. That was the youngest child of Josef. She passed away in 2018. I spoke to her once by phone a number of years ago, and was actually able to provide some materials to her. But most of my information, I've gotten, pictures from my mother-in-law, Diane, her brother, Les. I've gotten some information, just even at Thanksgiving a few weeks ago, I was just picking their brains, asking them questions about the family.
That's great. All right, thank you so much for this really inspiring presentation. Like you mentioned, the Nazis didn't just destroy families, but they destroyed Jewish culture, or they tried to. And just hearing your story and the way that you're recovering it reinforces to us how important Jewish learning is and Jewish books are. And we love to keep hearing. We want updates from you, how things progress. And we're going to keep supporting you in your work. So thank you for coming, everybody, today. And thank you again, Adam.
Thanks. And I think Monika actually raised her hand if she has a question, if she could share something.
Sure. Monika, you can go ahead and let's see if we can unmute you.
Okay, hi, here I am. No, this is just a brief remark on the question, how do you determine the books have been looted and not legally sold? The Vienna University Library has separate or a special department for NS, National Socialist Provenance Research. And we had determined beforehand that this is actually a 3-volume set of books like HUC-JIR, that they were looted because they originally were part of a large stock of books that used to belong to the Oriental Department, the Department for Oriental Studies at the University of Vienna. And the Oriental Department, had a very eminent professor of Oriental Studies in the 1930s and 40s, who was professor, chair, dean, and I think at some point he even became university director, rector. And he was member of an SS group. And so he had a very direct access to all kinds of stolen property, things that were stolen by Jews, like books, which he liked to have for the collection of his department. So, and this is the story of the Belf books at the university library. They were part and parcel of a larger collection of looted books of Oriental, Hebrew, Arabic, whatever contents that were allocated to the Oriental Department during the Nazi period because of the good connections the professor had with the authorities. So yes, and this is also very in this case this was well documented with old inventories and so on. So yeah, we could determine the character of the acquisition beyond any doubt.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're wrapping up now. Thank you everybody again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.